G'day everybody and welcome to the Drive Able podcast, where we discuss all things about driving and safer community transport for people with disabilities and medical conditions. If you haven't done so yet, make sure that you go back and listen to episode 14 and 15. In that episode, we had an interview with Nick Tiago, and we had to split it into two. There was so much good stuff in there. The interview went for a little bit longer, so we split it into two sections because there's so much gold in it. And this one is episode 16, where we get into some of those nitty gritties and reflect on the discussions that we had with Nick.
Yeah, Brad, that was an awesome interview with Nick. I've actually continued to talk to him a little bit since then. He's a great guy. Lots and lots of gold on so many levels, from life to disabilities and driving. I was very excited by that, and I'm also very excited to be talking about, I guess, reflecting on what we learnt. So you ready to get into it?
Yeah, let's get into it.
Driving is something many take for granted, but when someone has altered ability, then driving or getting out and about in your own car can be challenging. Driving with a disability doesn't mean you have to drive an old clapped out car with farm-like machinery, and relying on a wheelchair doesn't mean waiting for hours and then being in the back of a maxi access cab getting carsick. The Drivable podcast is designed to introduce and explore driving aids for people with disabilities, vehicle modifications, the NDIS, research, medical guidelines, driving techniques, and much, much more. The Drivable podcast is to help you be informed and be in control of your own independence so you can experience freedom through driving safely and reliably. I'm Ali, and with me is Brad, and together we have over 30 years of experience in disability and driving. Enough of the intros, let's get into it.
Now, if you haven't done so already, we spoke about Nick's controls, and they are really high-end controls. They are controls that are what's commonly known in the industry as space drive technology. Ali, should we get into what is space drive technology?
Yeah. So space drive is what I mean, just the name is kind of relatively self-explanatory in a way once you see it all set up. Because when you sit there, it kind of looks like you're in a control station of a spaceship. You've got all these different things. You sometimes may not even have the steering wheel in front of you. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. Just depends on the setup and depends on the application. But basically, I like to call it turning your car into a computer game, because you're turning your car into being able to be driven by things like joysticks and various controls like that. And one thing which I'll put disclosure out there, because Nick did this give a bit of an explanation of how his system works, but not all space drives are the same. A space drive is kind of like a very customizable setup where you may have fully automated everything, or you might have certain things that are just in there. So from what I understand, he had the steering automated, and I think he was still using his feet to accelerate and brake. Is that correct?
Yeah, so his cerebral palsy affects all four limbs, but his feet are able to control the pedal. So his right leg, he braces his left leg and he uses his right leg to lift and place onto the pedals. He doesn't pivot through his ankle as much. He uses more of his whole limb to press the pedals. He mentioned that that's fatiguing for him, but it's easier for him to do it that way and safer for him to do it that way than it is to use another hand control for braking and accelerating due to the issues in his shoulders. So we spoke about that in the episode. Make sure you go back and listen to that. But we reflected on how we came to terms with choosing these controls. And he went through a massive journey to try and figure out which controls were going to beat him. Were going to be best for him, I should say.
Yeah.
He went through hand controls, spinner knobs, trying to figure out how he was going to make the steering wheel move sufficiently enough to get him around a 90-degree corner, and then on top of that around a roundabout, which was significant issues for him in those early stages. But then
What was
when we
interesting-
introduced him, yeah,
Sorry,
go, keep going. You go.
I was going to say, what was interesting about that was kind of like the theme of what we keep harping on about is multiple trials and keep going on and on. And you can see that he's got a fairly successful outcome because of that reason. He was one thing about him, I guess, which stood out to me is that he's kind of like got a bit of an, iron skin. He seems to be able to handle a lot of, he's very resilient. Which, he spoke about his upbringing and he's got reasons around that, being taught about I can instead of I can't. But that whole thing that highlighted was he just kept trying different things, trialing so many different things until he found that one thing which worked. And then the one thing I thought interesting, which I really, I guess, encourage people to continue to think about is a lot of people especially in the last couple of decades, a lot of people in this disability industry, they're stuck to using a computer all the time. And so they become really good at using a computer in various forms of gaming and all of that kind of stuff. And those skills that they've built over a decade or two, they can transfer over into vehicle driving, not just by a space drive, because he had the space drive, which he said, he can drive around with a joystick, and they've got newer versions which can even make you go forward and backwards. But even some hand controls like the Caraspeed that we've spoken about, and even the other ones, they've got, even the ones that are on the right side, the setup on the arms and the way it moves is like a joystick. And what we find is people that have used those computers and those kind of gaming apps, they can come in and transfer those skills straight away. So I thought that was really, really cool.
Yeah, they tend to do stuff with their hands to make something on the screen maneuver, don't they? So when you get into a car, it's like, you're using fine dexterity to make a bigger object move. So there is a lot of transfer. And Nick reflected that he'd been training himself to drive for many, many years, even before he knew he was doing it with those games that he's got. And we can have a whole series on his gaming consoles, which date back to before the Commodore 64, right through to modern technology, the PS5s and so on and so forth. He's got it all. He's an avid collector.
Yeah. And the thing is the whole driving, just the other interesting thing I guess leading on from what I was saying, the other interesting thing I found was, so he continued to try different things, but one interesting thing that they said was, about his jumpy reactions to noises and things like that. And they were concerned about that. Yeah. What I found interesting was it was a situation where driving has actually helped his disability get better, because he was saying that he was very jumpy with these loud noises, and the operative word is was. And then after he got driving and got used to these environments, he said he doesn't even react like that anymore. So to me, that was a big highlight, that pushing through a boundary then changed the face of his disability and the way it works and the way he interacts with the world, which is a bit easier, I guess, because it's less jumpy. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, he's learned to relax his muscles a little bit more to be able to allow himself to drive for longer periods. He's had to train himself to do that as well. And he's done that by himself, by going with his family on longer drives and heading out into well, like your background photo there today, out into the countryside with long drives for him to Whyalla and so forth, and had to train himself not to relax his muscles so he doesn't fatigue. He still gets fatigue. No, don't get me wrong here. He hasn't totally overcome it. He holds a lot of tension in his shoulders and through his hip and back and so forth as well. But that freedom that comes from having his license is fantastic for him. Yeah.
So with the I guess drilling down a little bit more about these kind of high-end controls, because I think there's still a lot of people that could actually benefit from trying them out, which they haven't even given it any kind of I guess thought or consideration. As I said before, one of the things that he mentioned also, which is, I guess, a good point to mention, which we've mentioned in many episodes. Find the right OT that aligns with you. You know, he said that the OT he worked with, which was you, Brad, but not, just a little shameless plug. But anyway, the theme was the same though. Didn't give up, kept trying different things. You know, so then you end up with this space drive. And the other thing that we also highlighted was that whole idea of going to Sydney for the space drive. And one of the things which we, I guess I wanted to point out with that is this industry is a specialized industry. And I want to point that out with, again, not a bit of a shameless plug, but a little bit. So Mobility Engineering, which I work with, has a network of installers all around the country, right? And we like to promote the ideology that you can get as pretty much everything installed in your backyard. That's kind of what we like to promote, and that's what we try and push. However, there is some stuff which is super sensitive that we also will say, look, this stuff should not be installed by the person in the background, or should not be installed by this person, because it is so high level that it needs high level training, high level training from the manufacturers on how to do the programming, on how to set everything up, because even the slightest incorrect thing completely blows everything out and can cause an accident, which in Nick's case, it did. And so, and he was talking a lot about PME, and I know this particular product that he had is from a company called Paravan. Paravan is based in Germany. And I've actually met the guys from Paravan, and it's a huge company in Germany. They've been doing this stuff since probably before I was born. They are like super high end, super high tech. They work in bed with all these Volkswagens and all the manufacturers. Like they're all working together. And PME is basically the only Paravan trusted installer in Australia. And so I would be saying, if they're not doing a high-end control over there, watch what you're getting and double check what you're getting, because if these things go wrong, if they're not set up properly, they can have catastrophic effects. So just a very simple thing where the spring on the joystick was not strong enough caused an accident for Nick, as he said. You know, it caused the overcorrecting. So very important to go to the right people for the right products. And it's like that whole ideology of everybody working together and finding the right people for the right product for the right need, you know. And I thought that was a big thing to highlight, that don't just go to anyone for this high-end stuff. Make sure you're going to the right people and kind of quiz it and see if they've done it before.
Yeah, well, very true. So, and, you know, look, let's not throw PME under the bus here. They do a fantastic job, and you know, they have these products aligned to their company because they do a fantastic job. Nick's condition is different for how Paravan is actually set up. So we reflected on this actually in the podcast, is that the high-end controls are more often than not set up for somebody with a spinal injury, where they lose tone in their muscle. Their muscles are actually weaker because they're not getting the messages sent through the spinal cord, where Nick's is basically the opposite. He's got over hyped muscles, a hypertonicity in his muscles, and makes a really stiff movements. So we've got a really light controller, with Nick's having really high tension in his muscles. We tried mini wheels with him. The mini wheel is a tiny little steering wheel that is set up for basically just the shoulders to move, but that didn't suit him. He didn't have the tension in his pectoral muscles in his shoulders were too strong, and he wasn't able to release the tension to go around in the small circles to make the little mini steering wheel spin. We tried different other controllers as well, like spinner knobs and different mechanisms on the joystick controllers and all kinds. And it is this trial process that we've been harping on about in this podcast and reflecting on over and over and over again, is that trials really do put you in the best situation to make an informed decision. and being supported through that is vital.
Actually, on that note of, I guess, to clarify in terms of the product and the setup, see what he was saying. He was saying that the setup of the product potentially may have led him to an accident. And I actually wanted to talk about that because, so first of all, sometimes, and this might sound a little bit controversial, sometimes you may need to have an accident to figure out what is the problem. And unfortunately, that is what needed to happen in his case. Whether it's right or wrong, it is what it is. But it's also, it's hard to explain, but this is also the same if you're able-bodied or not. So one of the interesting things that he highlighted out there was the police officer mentioned about, how did this guy get his license, et cetera, et cetera. And to be honest, that kind of boiled my blood a little bit because like one of my mates, one of my good mates, Sam, which I'll throw under the bus, he's a good mate of mine from high school. He's the same age as me. We're in our 40s, early 40s. He's had about 15 car accidents since he's been driving. Like we all walk around saying, mate, you shouldn't be driving, he just has car accidents all the time, and his car accidents are teaching him that, hey, you shouldn't drive this way, or you shouldn't do that way, or don't drive that car, that's too big for you, or whatever, right? But because he's able-bodied, no one's turning around and saying, oh, how did he get his license? But I can tell you, I'm thinking that about my mate Sam. I'm like, how the hell did this guy get his license? But no one's even asking that. No one's even saying that to him because he's not in a wheelchair or he's not he's a disability, But like someone mentioned to Nick, how he mentioned that who gives a shit? Someone has an accident, whoop-de-doo. It's not because you're disabled, it's because you had an accident. You overcorrected. Lots of people overcorrect, and now that you know that, hey, I need to really drill down and maybe potentially even adjust my controls, so be it. It doesn't mean that there's something wrong, and it doesn't mean you shouldn't be on the road or we should be all scared about this whole situation. Unfortunately, accidents happen, and an accident happened, and it wasn't, I don't believe it was a result of disability or incorrect setup or anything. It was just an accident, and it highlighted something that then needed to get fixed, just like if you were able-bodied or not. And I really wanted to, I guess, put that out there because end users that we deal with a lot get very, very worried about that. And we've also mentioned that in this podcast, even with that was the big theme of talking to Neville, that, check yourself and make sure you are looking after the community. But at the same time, there is a balance. You don't want to lock yourself up in the house because you think, oh, I might have an accident. People have accidents. Everyone has accidents. You know what I mean? So that shouldn't be the be all and end all, and I thought that was kind of an interesting thing. I don't think necessarily his product was incorrectly set up in the beginning. It just was set up the way it was set up, where everybody thought it was suitable. He gave some feedback and it didn't work, the feedback, obviously, or whatever happened. He had an accident. They realized, okay, no, this is pretty serious. You can make some improvements, and they did that. And I don't think there's anything negative about that whole process at all.
Yeah, look, slightly different opinion on that, and that's why we've got two of us on this podcast, so we can reflect on each other's bits and pieces here with what we're saying.
Yeah,
I think something could have been done about it, and he was mentioning that the spring was too loose and that it was really fatiguing for him, and that he found it really hard to drive in a straight line over prolonged periods. And he mentioned that back to the company multiple times. So having that ear to listen and trust that the person is giving you appropriate feedback and doing something about it is vital in this industry. So we don't have potential accidents. Listening and taking on feedback is critical in any business, and it's also really critical in this scenario because accidents can be killers. And reflecting on a couple of things that you said there, Ali, is that everyone has accidents. We don't want to say that that's an okay thing. And
I get what you mean.
we don't want to be promoting that it's okay to have an accident. Well, I certainly don't. And people might be aware that I'm a board member on the Get Home Safe Foundation, which is about getting home to your family safe. The impacts that it has on somebody if you do have a critical injury or get killed in a car accident has a rolling effect through a family dynamic and has a major impact on so many people's lives. And look, at these things need to be proactive right at the start rather than reactive. That's what I'm trying to say here.
Well, that part I 100% agree with.
Yeah.
But yeah, as I said, accidents can happen. So
they do. They do.
And,
but we want to try and avoid them as much as we can.
So but actually the point you said about listening is a fantastic point, because I've had this conversation actually with my team in the last week as well. And it's very, very important in this industry in particular, because so many times, what I found is actually more often than not, when the end user is describing their problem, you may need to really listen for a lot more than what they're saying, if that makes sense.
Yeah, those little red flags that come up.
So many times we've had customers complaining about something. They're saying, "Oh, this is wrong, and that's wrong, and this is wrong," and I've found, and I've had to kind of coach my team and going, don't go, okay, this person said this is wrong, and go and fix that problem immediately. Understand what is actually going on. What are those implications? How is that affecting other things? Because they might be looking at one particular thing and they're highlighting that thing. But often, and more often than not, particularly in a disability environment, one thing can affect many, many other things. So you've got to listen, understand what's going on, and holistically find out what's the problem. And to your point, like I've been guilty of it as well, where, I might have had someone like Nick calling and saying, "Oh, I've got this problem with the spring and blah, blah, blah." And I'm not really listening to him. I'm sort of going, okay, yeah, he's got a problem. He'll fix it. He'll get used to it. And I'm not really listening, and that's something that we need to really practice. And I really push our team and a lot of people, especially in this space, because you can't everybody's different, especially in this space. Like if you've got cerebral palsy, person A, person B, person C, person D, completely different ways of interacting with the world, So if I'm not listening to that person and I go, okay, Nick has cerebral palsy, so he's an XYZ and he does these things this way, then I've lost the whole story. I need to actually sit down and listen, not just to his direct interactions, but those kind of little things, that's those flags that is coming up as well. Those little things that he talks about, his interactions, getting in and out of the car, tilting his head, or all those little things. Those things actually create that big picture, especially in this thing. So I really, really promote that, really listen. What are they saying? What is the message behind the message?
Yeah, and then we've got to line those up with the Australian guidelines and design rules and so forth. There's a lot that needs to go into these type of things. And that's why we've started this podcast about it all, is that it's not just as simple as putting a spinner knob on a steering wheel. There is so much that goes into it. And that's why we've started this podcast and digging deeper in with these reflection pieces, because there's a lot of stuff that goes on behind the scenes that a lot of people just might not know about in regards to these Australian road rules and design rules and so forth. And I'm going to do a little segue to our next episode to really know a little bit more about that. Our next episode, where we've actually got an expert in this area. Ali, do you want to introduce him?
Yeah. So that's Amin, who's actually my brother as well. And he'll be, he's actually, in the last year, he's been elected to represent Australia on the Australian standards board, on the international standards boards, as an Australian representative. So basically, he'll be here talking about how that affects us on a daily basis, how those standards are important. And yeah, they are very, very important. And I guess even talking about, bringing back to what Nick went through.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, getting the car up and running, look how many trials and how many visits and how long it took the car to be modified, because you've got to make sure you meet those standards, and those things, especially in a car like that, and you're doing all of those things, you've got to have it all tested, you've got to have it all certified and approved by your local authority. And something like that, you may even have to have it presented to your local authority to have them look at and inspect. Because it's a pretty high-end modification, and not only will they be accepting of external certifications, they might want to have a look at it themselves, and so it's really interesting. So
there's a lot of steps that have to go through, and the whole process. Look, we've just had a client go through the whole process, and it's coming up to he's about to get his car, and we're just ticking onto a year and a half since he had the assessment with us. So these high-end controls, there's a lot of behind-the-scenes work in regards to trying to get funding approved to start off with. That's a huge area in regards to the NDIS world now. Nick was before NDIS, but there's still a lot of proof that it was value for money to start off with. Then there's a whole purchase of the vehicle, getting the right vehicle purchase that's going to meet the needs of the client. So quite often there's a wheelchair involved, there's lifters that are involved, there's access to the driving position that's involved. So then there's the trial of hand controls or high-end space drive controls, and figuring out what's actually going to work, bringing all of that together, and then getting it into the workshop. So the client that we've just had to buy the car here in South Australia, send it to Melbourne to have a lowered floor and access. Then they sent it through to Sydney to have the high-end controls installed. He's had to make multiple trips for fittings, both to Melbourne and to Sydney now for both of these. There's a lot of steps along the way. And they take a lot of time. They take a lot of energy from all of these people. But as Nick reflected on, the reward, the return on that investment has been magnificent for him. He's socially included in so many more things now. The designated driver for lots of outings. So that means he's able to be a contributor to his friendship base for his family. He's able to get to family events. And like you said, he just doesn't want to catch taxis at all anymore.
Well, I mean, I've got some notes here from that episode, and I've got big capital letters here that says, "Wow, his driving saved his life," because he was on the brink of suicide, and I mean, it was through his driving journey, but that's the thing. Like I guess that's what I want to highlight, to encourage. It was a battle for the guy, for him. What was that, like 2 to 3 years of hit and miss?
Yep.
By the time you sort of count the accident and the break and all of that, even longer, right?
Mm-hmm.
But he stuck with it, and I'm sure that there's a lot of people that maybe even OTs or people that have listened, end users that have maybe even given up on this process, because it might feel like never ending, and if I was, a year into it and going to all these visits and things like that, and maybe one funding rejection or something like that, it'll just, it'll send you in a downward spiral. But look on the other side of it, as you said, Nick is, he was on the brink of suicide, but he brought himself back, and he all contributes to driving. And not just that, he's as you said, he's an integral member of his society, Yeah. And as I said to him, and I strongly believe that what's going to happen is, he's amongst all his friends that are young, and he's doing a bit of designated driving, and they'll have after parties at his house and all that kind of stuff. And, they're all having a great time. And what's going to happen is, I believe when he's older, when they've all got kids and all that kind of stuff, his friendship is going to be priceless to his community, because they're going to go, you know what? Thank you, Nick, for making our childhood and our youthful days so great, because you were always there. You were like the pillar of solidity, and if I can think of when I was those ages, if I had a friend like that, it would have been a lot better. It probably would have been a lot better looked after as well, you know?
Yeah, look, he's done so much in that van. He reflected that he was in Scouts there. He's not in Scouts anymore, but he's told me stories of getting out and into the wilderness and camping and taking his Mobility X8 four-wheel drive wheelchair and getting into trouble with that, rolling it down hills, but just getting out and having adventures and living life, from stories of being Scouts to being the designated driver. But I've also know that he's had assisted people move house with his van, packing the van up and moving people in and out and all those type of things as well. He's an integral part of his community. Thanks to having that van, having license and being able to drive. So it means a lot.
Yeah. And I guess one of the final things I'll just keep highlighting, I guess, on that is so many people had to come together, and you just mentioned that about the other person you're working with to make this happen. And to me, that is, again, another thing that we need to highlight is this industry has really no room for aggressive competitiveness by anybody, from OTs to end users to converters to the lot, you know, suppliers. If you are aggressively competitive, you lose. Everybody loses. The community loses. But if you are working with the competitors, with the other people, you know, like even Nick mentioned that Brad had to work with Tom as another OT because he was more of an expert. And I dare say there's OTs out there that wouldn't work with somebody else because they don't like him, or it's a competition or something like that. And that's not okay. You know, if you need to figure out that you need to partner up with another OT because they're good with this, or another converter because they're good with that, you know, like we had Peter last week who's coming up about multiple converters, the person you're talking about getting it done by one person and then another person. People are you need to have people linking up to make this thing successful, you know, and when you do, the community thrives, and that's what I love to see.
Yeah, look, great place to end it on, I think. When Nick went through this, there was really only one provider for Space Drive. Yeah. Now there's more in Australia. So there's even more opportunities to trial things now. There's Total Ability, which has also got Space Drive technology through a different company. It's not Paravan, it's FADL, and he's got FADL type products in there as well, in vans, and they can actually travel around Australia. So the opportunities right now for people to be able to drive with really high-end controls. Maybe you've thought you've never been able to drive because limbs don't work for whatever medical condition or disability. Now might be a fantastic opportunity to maybe reopen that door and have a look on the other side to see if there is something that's available to you. There are products that, you know, where in South Australia, we were limited by traveling to Sydney previously. There's now more opportunity to trial things in this era of NDIS than there ever has been before. And so, yeah, get out there and do those trials.
And it's just going to keep increasing as well. So, I think so just get out there.
Yeah, I think so. All right, should we wrap it up?
Let's wrap it up. All right, that's it for this episode. Thanks very much for joining us and listening in. And a huge thank you for Nick for your last couple of episodes and all of that wonderful, valuable content and talking to us about the Space Drive technology. That was great, and it was great to kind of reflect on that.
Yeah, and if you want to get in contact with Nick, we will put contact details in the show notes. We'll also put a video of Nick driving with Space Drive where his hands do not touch the steering wheel, and you'll see the steering wheel spin around in front of you. It's really valuable to watch that so you understand how this all comes together. Yeah. As we say in every episode, if you've got any queries about what can work for you and what you can do to get out on the road, make sure that you get in contact with your local OT or your mobility dealer and set yourself up with a trial. And as we say in every episode, trials really do put you in the driver's seat. That's it for now. Thanks very much for tuning in.
Thanks, guys. See you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Drive Able podcast with Brad Williams and Ali Akbarian. If you like what you've heard, make sure you like, rate, and subscribe. It really does make a massive difference. If you or anyone you know would like to share a story about driving with a disability, or you would like to get in contact, find the show notes, or find the resources mentioned in this episode, you can find us on Facebook. Just search @Drive Able Podcast for more information.